Um, yeah, so I just want to say before we get the Q&A going, it's really an opportunity to just ask anything that you want to ask. These geniuses who just shared their words with us. Don't be bashful. Likewise for you guys, if you have anything you want to ask one another, welcome, Rebecca. I just want to say I was very moved by all of your readings, and I would love to just give a round of applause for all of these authors. Thank you. Thank you all. So, yeah, Duane, did you want to kick it off? Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll join the writers. So I'll take a seat. So thanks once again. I'm gonna echo Evan's thank you and say thank you again to all the writers who came out and to the audience members as well who came to share this experience with us and really bear witness to the really unique and amazing individual spirits up here. I want to acknowledge how important it is to listen to writers of color and to have their work hold space. And one thing that I'd like to just start off with a question here is, can we talk a little bit about our processes as a writer? What brings you to the work? What inspires you? And maybe even how do you finish a piece? Do you want to start us off? Okay.
My process as a writer, sometimes it's hard to be a writer because the last time I was with you, we were in downtown Oakland, and there was like the arcade games inside one of those bars. Well, I wrote about how that's some metaphor for God. So every experience starts to turn into like an examination of like how can I write about that? Where it's like I have a piece in my memoir about like how somehow you're just turning in a moment of breakfast where you have a bowl of oatmeal in front of you, and then now you're thinking about how grandma taught me that if I just scrape the edges, then it'll be cooler. And then I get to the middle, and that's how I eat oatmeal. And is that something that needs to go into the memoir, or does that become some story that's very comforting? So and you start as a memoirist. I start with the story and then try to extract meaning out of it, as opposed to writing fiction where you start with meaning and then you create a story. But then you also asked, how do I finish a piece? I have to think about what I choose to write are grounded in different emotions. Songwriting is when I am sad, and that's like what I'll do. And then writing personal essays is when like I'm angry, the anger that comes from the everyday survival of living as a black queer man in the United States.
Thank you. Yeah, you can pass it either direction.
All right, because I have to. All right, because it's easier than bailing out of jail. It's a way to process emotions and feelings. If I want to learn about something, I write about it. I write on everything. I write on the backs of checks, envelopes, receipts, and so it gets rather maniacal at times. My art cards are going to look crazy. As far as finishing pieces, I don't know if work is ever actually finished. You know, there's a saying, you just stop working on it. And for me, I think I stop working on it until I pick it up and I want to perform it again. And then I read it and I think, that was good then, but tonight I'm going to be in this room. And if it just said 3 other things, this would be perfect for that room. So pieces are constantly evolving. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I write because I have never been one to talk out loud. Like, this is the most, a lot of my own family has heard me read poems or say anything out loud because I'm like, I write it down, I get it out, and whether that's for anyone else, it'll be decided for me down the line. And I think I've learned I used to write and think, oh, that doesn't make sense. Those things aren't connected. And I would try to separate, like a hospital poem was only about the hospital. But now I know that, like, if I'm writing about a Ziploc bag full of Aleve, it's because I have it in my bag and it's what I was thinking about and it's what's going to go into the poem. So I think I've just learned to write the feeling, and if that feels ever finished, I really can't say, but it's gotten me this far, so I think it's working somehow.
Similarly to ayodele, I also write because I have to. I mean, it's a way that, like, my practice, I guess, to talk a little bit about how I visualize it is like I feel like every subject is a little prism, and there's infinite ways that you can pick to enter this jewel. But no matter which one you pick, you're gonna understand it when you exit it. And you're going to reflect around inside like a beam of light, understanding and building connections in ways that like didn't exist before then. And that's been the biggest pull for writing, but art in general for me throughout my life. And in terms of when I feel ready to let a piece sit down, to put it down, or to be done, I just feel it. Or if it's like a deadline, it's when the deadline has passed. Sometimes we need those external factors, right, to put a stamp on it.
Yeah, thank you all for those responses here. We have a question. Yes. Thank you for that question. Yeah, that was a really good one. I want to answer that too. I think one question that I'm really just involved with right now is because I'm a fantasy writer, a lot of the pieces that I write include metaphor. And sometimes I'm in question with what that metaphor means, what that metaphor is. I find myself constantly in question with my identity, even though I know who I am. I think I know who I am. Maybe tomorrow I'm somebody different. I find myself in question with, sometimes just simple things like the wind is blowing this way today. How does that make me feel on the inside? Sometimes the questions start really small, or they start in arbitrary places. And then they kind of evolve into these kind of larger pieces that can make larger statements. I think I'm going to stop there.
What is acceptance?
Okay, it's not gonna get smaller. I am chasing the presence of God in man. I am not overwhelmed. I just cannot separate myself from the amount of suffering that people cause people. And so I wonder, what is the process, the day, the place, the time, or if the God code ever kicks in and we get it right and we don't destroy ourselves. I'm not worried about the planet will be here. I worry a lot about us destroying ourselves.
There's always a lot of questions, but I think I'm just trying to think about how caretaking at such a young age for multiple people has affected how I see myself and how those experiences, since I'm a little removed from them, like what they really mean, because I was not processing as they were happening. And also thinking about what memory is trying to teach me instead of just trying to recall specific words, trying to really understand why thoughts pop up and what I can do with them to move forward.
So I'm kind of over being angry. So something that's constantly on my mind, and I think is going to be on my mind for a very long time. Maybe it will circle in my artistic practice over and over and over again, and that's okay with me, is how do I help people, not force or to, express vengeance or hurt or anger, but how do I help people see me for who I am and how I want to be seen?
Yeah, thanks everyone for those responses. Any more questions?
I'm trying to find out how to word it, but grief appeared in every single piece. And I'm curious, as you read, does it feel like a release or does it feel like the grief is more present? Just curious for how you navigate the grief that you beautifully described in your work.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I'll answer that too. I think grief in a lot of ways when I'm dealing with it in my work is always an act of transformation. It's always how can I take this and transmogrify it into something that can actually serve me. And I think grief, Bell Hooks talks about this in her book, All About Love, and how an expression of grief is also an expression of how much you love something. And I think about that too in my own work, and just how sometimes it's about sitting with it too. So I think that's like kind of the two ends that I work with on grief, is sitting with it, and then sometimes maybe even transforming it.
Yeah, you certainly can tell how much you love someone when you experience grief. I think that to answer your question, the grief feels more present. I feel like we invited Grandpa Frank into this space, and so I get chills from that.
So going backwards, I think that it is omnipresent when it's being shared, but then that sharing sort of dissipates it. It is a gift to everybody that's around, and then that makes the bag that I carried into the room a little lighter. When I go back out, it is about memory and honoring and loving, and also about wholeness. I think that maybe writ large, grief is hard to deal with for society as a whole because there are so many recurring wounding things. So people desensitize, and especially people of color, and I've observed this especially about Black people, that there's a certain amount of shutting down, cutting off self-boundaries that are necessary in order to continue to pretend like we're sane. There's a tipping point at which if too much is in the consciousness, you notice I said pretending like we're sane. We go to work the day after someone's shot down. People ask, how do you feel about what's happening on TV every 15 minutes? You have to make a space between yourself. So a lot of my work is me not taking that space so that other people can. Like I said in the poem, I remember the things that you can't remember and walk around in whole. So I think it's an honoring, and I think that it is a claim to wholeness. A lot of people, I heard someone the other day say, I don't want to hear any poems that are lamenting. So you just want to cut off that part and talk about the daisies and the butterflies. I mean, that is a world, but it's not the world that I live in where I want it to be whole, for us to have all of ourselves in it.
Yeah, I like how you phrased it as the grief being more present. I think for me, I'm able to be in conversation with the grief. One of the pieces I read was about something that happened when I was 17. I'm 31 now, and I'm finally able to read it and not be in that moment. I'm able to understand that is something that occurred and how I feel about it now. And so I think sometimes it is the time that gives the physical distance, but other times I write it and I'm able to read it right then. I think it just depends on which grief I'm talking about, because there are many.
To me, grief, it's comes from a lot of, I feel like it's sort of not interchangeable, but it's to a degree synonymous with trauma, right? So for me, the answer to this question, I cannot remember who has this quote, but it's like, we cannot return to an untraumatized version of ourselves. So how do we continue? What can we do next? That's how I feel like the grief shows up in my work, and in that way, it's never ending. It's never going to go away. It's always going to be there. But there's always something else, right? There's always, like you said, a transmogrification that can occur if you are brave enough to welcome that into your heart and your life.
Yes.
I'm wondering if there's a sheet that has this, great, but like if you can say your names and how we can find your work online.
Yes, we do have that information available, I think. It's on on the Quiet Lightning website. Yes, and thank you for that question too, because we need visibility. That's another thing for us. Yeah. Certainly. I'll go ahead and start off, and then maybe we can go in the direction we've been. Okay. I'm Duane Horton, and I'm a Black queer fantasy writer.
Charles Orgbon, a young adult children's author.
Ayodele, nzinga. I write in multiple genres.
Rebecca Samuelson, capital P poet.
Griffin Jing Martin, poet but also interdisciplinary artist.
And yeah. You know what? I think one of the things that has really held me, especially in the pandemic years, is community. I moved here in 2017, and when I moved here, I was looking for a community. I was looking to be able to call myself an artist. I was looking to be able to be among folks who were trying to do the same thing that I was trying to do. And to be able to find a space of writers, of people of color who I can call home with, but also to be able to access communities that have always been important to me too, has been something that has truly just been a light in my pathway. So, you know, one thing I want to recognize is how hard it is to build community. Even anywhere you go, it can be difficult, but I think especially for those of us of color with queer identities, without queer identities, that lay on different intersections of identity, it can be difficult. So I think that, you know, that's why I take all my friendships super seriously, because I'm like, you're part of the family now. My own family. But yeah, I think that would be one really big thing for me.
I know that I said the question that I'm dealing with is what is acceptance? But actually the thing that has been helpful for me is acceptance. I'm still learning what it is. But I find that whatever problem I'm having, if I can use the power of language to then say, what is it that I'm not accepting? It's not how I think about it. That's not how the problem occurs to me. No one says acceptance in the development of the problem, but like to be able to transform that to what am I not accepting? And then accept that. It doesn't happen the first time. But to then accept that is freeing and liberating and allows me to invite another emotion, maybe gratitude, or allows me to be more present to what is really feeding me at that moment.
Everything that happens has at least two sides to it, and actually more, but everybody can see in at least the binary. So while the pandemic was really horrible for a bunch of really obvious reasons, some of the blessings it brought, everybody was able to unplug from getting up and working yourselves to death for someone else for very small return, and you here, so you survived it. So this huge break in what you perceived as reality allows for a real reset. And so as the world rushes to make itself be back just the way it was the day before the pandemic existed, we've all had a recent slice of, no, it don't have to be like that. And so I'm really leaning into that little door that I understand it's eking closed every day, but I got my whole body leaning against that door. I'm about to lay down sideways, you know, so that we can understand that some other things are possible.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just been expressing another layer of honesty to now every interaction that I have. I don't have time to say I'm doing well if I'm not doing well. I'm going to tell you why I'm not doing well, and if you hear me, cool. If you don't, I have to say it for me, because there's just no time for it. I don't have time for it anymore.
For me, community was already dropped, but I feel like that's just such a central thing to who I am as a person, because something that's been very, very hard for me throughout my life is figuring out who I am, because that was never handed to me, you know, in like on a silver platter, the way it was for some people. For the majority of people, it's been a really difficult process of like figuring out, okay, like who am I? Which is funny to say. But the thing that I have found most helpful is friendship and community, because the friends you hold and the people that you have near to you are like the most beautiful mirrors that reflect back at you and show you where you're at.
Thank you. And so I think that was our last question here. And I'm going to give the mic back to Evan here, but I want to thank everyone, myself again.
Thank you, guys. step in front of that. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all so much for sharing and for being who you are, even when you don't exactly know who that is or how to express it.